So noticing the body, noticing the breathing, notice the posture and shape. Reminding oneself to release on the out breath. Feeling the ground, feeling the sensation of gravity on the bottoms of the feet. So turning inward, tuning in, releasing, opening. Some specifics that might need a little help with conscious awareness, lower back. So either hanging the hips or pointing the tailbone towards the ground to lengthen and release lower back. Feeling the weight of the arms and hands pulling the shoulders straight down. And the back crown of the head pointing directly to the ceiling. So we have the same action that we had in the lower back, exactly the same process in the back of the neck. Releasing the abdomen to move freely with the breath. And resting the hands, mind, and breath below the navel. And with each exhale, consciously releasing more tensions down and more weight down into the feet. Without any ensuing collapsation at all. So that yin-yang pairing, those two directions at once. The yin is the sinking, the down, releasing weight and tensions down with gravity. But if we just have that, we'll end up collapsing. It's oppressive. If we have just the yang or too much yang, we have the uprightness, openness, but that can end up being floaty, ungrounded. So both happening. But generally speaking, the down is first. Overall, ultimately, yin is primary. And eventually, in fact, the yin will create that rising energy. At first, we have to manufacture it, do one, and then find the other and do the other. That's very interesting. It's very enjoyable. It's very enlightening. Feels very good when you start to get the natural response. The echo back, releasing down, will create the rising. It's actually already happening, but it's a matter of refining our ting, refining our awareness to be able to sense it, find it, and then we can encourage it because we can track it now. But even just physically, mechanically, releasing, relaxing down, and then aligning the skeleton. So the skeletal structure is vertical and very upright. And if I just were to say vertical and upright, that would tend to create tension coming up. So the countering of that is that sinking, releasing. Or the imagery we often use is the muscles hanging from the bones. So that kind of brings a lot of things together in one phrase. The muscles hanging, but if we just said hang the muscles or release the muscles, we might just have this. So muscles hang from the bones. So the bones are mentioned, so that is reminding us that our bones are very upright, very vertical. And they're completely equipped to carry the entire weight of the body. So we don't have to hold up at all. So opening and aligning skeletal structure, letting the muscles hang off the bones, and we get those two directions. And then centering our mind and our energy here at home base below the navel. So we have these two directions, sinking and upright or even rising. So we have these two directions and we have center. And so there's a common saying in Tai Chi, very old saying, heaven, earth, man. Of course, that was a long time ago, so it wasn't politically correct in terms of their phraseology, person. But to use that term, heaven, earth, man, that encapsulates a lot of cosmology and philosophy in one short term. Heaven, earth, and human being is between heaven and earth. And this point here is the exact junction, exact center place between heaven and earth. As we mentioned the other day, talking about divine stem, that's the potential of the human being. And each out breath is a releasing breath, consciously releasing even more, and then consciously allowing an upness arising, but only because we have the sinking first. So again, that rising without the sinking, we're gonna get floaty, insubstantial. Even if we have the rising and then sinking, it's not as it's not as grounded, it's not as substantial, not as balanced. So we want that sinking first. From the sinking, we allow or eventually find the rising. And letting the arms hang with gravity. See if you can still, to some degree or another, have contact with this sinking, flowing down, and also this uprightness of the bones. Sinking and rising. It's that differential between yin and yang and those different directions. It's that differential that creates the qi and tai chi. That almost like friction type of thing. Sinking and rising, and then we do it. There's other ways of doing it too. That's the most basic general way. That polarity. That's the engine that generates the qi in Tai Chi. Let's just go into some commencement movement. Seeing what qualities and feelings you can maintain, principles you can maintain, what things are not happening, and see if you can encourage them, nurture them to happen. For example, how are the shoulder joints? Are they opening and releasing? Arms are flowing forward, opening and releasing the physical joints of the shoulders. That also pulls the shoulders down. Or is there some inness there, some holding on? So some real basic, important physical things to scan and check out. Is there a tightness in the lower back? These long muscles back here, I'll exaggerate a little bit. Send the arms forward. And so the muscles of the lower back could be anywhere in the back, could be the whole back, pulling back to counter this weight that's up here. Weight's out here, right? All the way out here, that's where the weight's going, because it goes that far with your body. We don't want these muscles to be pulling back, countering that tension. So we counter that forward weight by angling our hips, by pointing the tailbone, or simply hanging the hips straight down, elongating this straight down. That's how we counter that weight going forward. So let's actively do that. So it's simply, if I simply drop the hips, let's just do that a few times. Even on a very physical level, that's just a little mini squat. But the point of that little sink is to flatten the lower back. So whenever you sit into a chair, that flattens, releases, extends, opens. So eventually that's done by releasing. You release. But first we have to mechanically, physically squat a little bit and let the lower back extend and release. So if you do that or allow a little more hanging of the hips, that directly counters the arms going out. In fact, to really make that happen automatically, have the hanging, sinking of the hips be what's making the arms go out. So as I free fall my hips, have that send my arms out. Let's do this a few times. This is a helpful little drill. My basic standing here. I'm going to fall and drop. And your body will catch yourself, your legs will catch yourself. Hopefully, after you fall a few inches. So if I just kind of think, just free fall and fall, my legs, my nervous system will catch me. But in that little portion of time, distance, you were hanging or free falling. So do that a few times with the idea of trying to get your mind in that small space of time where your hips are just hanging, where you're in the midst of a free fall. And maybe allow the drop to be a little bit further than what you would let happen. So you can allow these things to occur here. So maybe you obviously you catch yourself as soon as you notice that you're falling. So elongate that time before you catch yourself. Try not to be too tight and reactive. You'll know you'll catch yourself, and because you know you'll catch yourself, you can let that happen a little bit further, a little bit longer before you catch yourself. And that creates the alignment through the whole spine and lower back that we want. I'm just going to drop and catch myself. Drop, catch myself. Drop, catch myself. And notice what happens to the alignment of the hips and the lower back. Okay, now do that in slow motion. That's actually how we do start the set and how we set commencement on its way. Exactly that, but it's going to be slow motion and maybe not quite as far. So as I hang the hips, I let that send my elbows and arms away from me. And you can come up a little bit again as the arms come down. So you're set up for another slow motion fall. But it's the releasing of the hips, the releasing of the lower vertebrae and the hips that sends the arms out. And then instead of sending my arms ahead of me and these muscles firing to counter that extended weight out in front of me, my arms going out is only accentuating the opening and lengthening of my spine and back muscles because I've set it up, because of how I've set it up and how I've angled it. So that the dropping of my hips sends my arms out and it only encourages more and more and more opening and lengthening because I've set it up that way. Rather than sending the arms out and trying to straighten the lower back. Hanging the hips, releasing, lengthening the lower back sends the arms out. And whatever releasing and opening you notice in the lower back, contribute to it, add to it, stay with that to keep sending your arms out. But instead of keep doing it physically dropping lower and lower to keep it that lower back extending, you do it intentionally, directionally with your feeling and your intention. Let me know if you have any thoughts or questions or comments about this process. Slow motion drop is what sends your arms forward. And your hips will only continue to pull on the long muscles of your spine and continue to open the actual space between the vertebrae.
Yeah, so I noticed when I transitioned from this being biomechanical to more intentional, it seems to mostly apply to my spinal column dropping rather than the whole sort of body unit.
So the spinal column kind of independently moving or thinking?
Yeah, that seems to become more primary. I mean, of course, everything moves, but if I think about where it seems to originate, those, the muscles surrounding the spinal column seem to be the ones involved.
So which process are you getting more of a release and opening?
Yeah, I guess trying to follow your direction, we did this big physical movement, and then to bring it more intentional, that's the biggest change I notice, is that it becomes a more refined, like that inner column, including the abdomen and everything, is what descends.
Right. So that's very, very good. So that means you're on the level of working on the level of intention, level of ting and yi, awareness and intention. And so you want to more and more work on that level. Often you have to maybe prime the pump with the physical things, but then more and more, quicker and quicker, that ignites the awareness and intention, and then that's where you work from. So dive into that level from which you're working and make that your focus. And then you always have the option of bringing in the physical mechanics if you need to prime the pump. So that's very good. So then, and if any of you others can relate to that, where it's really starting to be triggered by simply the intention. So what I would suggest that we do right now to continue to work with this is do it less and less physical. You might still get physical movement, maybe even this almost the same amount or same amount of physical movement, but now don't do it physically, do it purely with the feeling of what you know it's supposed to feel like. So use the intention 99 or 100% rather than the physical mechanical. Okay. Of course, what that means is it becomes 100% internal. Not that there won't be physical movement, there will be, because it's generating physical movement. But this is the path inward to more and more internal. That's sourced from there, that becomes where the work is done. So what happens, and you may or may not have an answer to this right now, but if you do, what happens if you make that more purely intentional? That you're not going to try to do any move, you're not going to make any movement. Movement will occur, but 100% on the intentional round. How does that feel? What happens? What happens more? How does it change it suddenly? So if you're getting internal feedback on that, you can let me know. If not, that's fine. But you want to, it's 100% in that direction is what we want to do.
Yeah, I guess I get a little bit of a sense, you use the metaphor of like pouring sand or pouring water, the sense that stuff pours downward at the, you know, to create the outward movement. I don't know what the stuff is.
So that's sinking chi. That's that downward direction in terms of intention and energy. And so that's, again, that's the level of work, and more so the level of work, and that level even gets deeper and deeper. That's the work of the internal arts. So you, again, as I said, you want to embrace that. You want to dive into that, what you're experiencing there. Let that become the place from which you work, the feeling that you work from. Now, to take this one step further, or add a slight extra aspect to this, and to start with, I'll simply say, be aware of the background of the head pointing directly to the ceiling. That's enough of an additional dimension actually to add to this. Do the sinking first, the hanging of the hips, the dropping of the hips, the slow motion free fall first. And then after that, or almost immediately after that, become aware of the background of your head being flush facing the ceiling. Let me know what that does for you. And once in a while, remind yourself to release the abdomen, release any tensions. So letting that drop in slow motion, but completely releasing, 100%, letting it go. Letting it just drop with gravity, the hip cage. Let that do what it does to your body. Notice what that does. And then shortly after that, or immediately after that, consciously face the background of the head directly to the ceiling. So hang the hips and face the background of the head to the ceiling. Have that be what drives your arms out away from you.
Yeah, so what I notice is it makes me feel like my spine's longer because I'm actually including the top of it.
Yes, yeah.
And then it can dangle and descend because there's this cap.
Yes. So as much as what we did up to before that point, as much as that may have done a lot of good things, certainly for the lower back, maybe the lower half of the spine, and maybe something for the whole spine, but probably not comprehensively. So yes, this will then make sure that the upper spine and the neck are getting just as much energetic effect and attention as the dropping here. Because we're quite stiff and compacted, the action here will tend to not include or work its way up to the entire spine. So this will actively get it from both directions. Now, eventually, when we become very open and very released, any action anywhere will affect the whole thing. So if I was extremely open and released, soft, open and released, just the hanging of my tailbone would open up the entire spine, because everything is, all the muscles and connective tissues are open and ready to release and open more. Of course, what happens is that even as we open certain things, the other tissues are holding on. So that just helps us be more comprehensive through the entire spine.
Yeah, I'm finding that the chi, it's much easier to have the chi raise the arms with all of that going on. Like I'm really open, lot of chi movement. unbelievable. Yeah, it's really opened up my spine.
Right. And so that will tend to be a real trigger for lots of chi flow. So that is very
Mhm.
good. And it'd be very good and normal if you feel any pull in any of the muscles or tissues, and because it's gently coaxing, encouraging the body, giving the body a chance to open and release. So if you feel some discomfort or some little bit of pressure or pulling, that's definitely going to be happening. But if you feel that really triggering a big chi flow, then you're getting some good action happening in the physicality and also in the energy pathways. But do allow in your awareness any parts, the neck or any part of the back that's being gently pulled. And so those places are the tight places. Those are the short places. They're being asked and gently coaxed to be more open, lengthened. Now, we can add to this motion, another motion we do, it starts like commencement. Once the arms are forward, palms rotate to face chest, go apart from each other, come closer, palms facing, and then drifting down. And so here is a slight rising, the body, slight sinking, bending the knees, rising, sinking, breathing in, rising, breathing out, sinking. Let those shoulder joints be opened and released. So we'll do a little bit of an exercise or drill with this, and do this as much as you can, just intentionally. Don't try to do this muscularly at all, and try to help yourself avoid doing it muscularly. Just do it intentionally. And this is a drill to, again, to coax things to open. As you rise, so this is the rising part. So whenever you're rising, imagine the hips are stationary, that either they continue to drop or they're in a bracket where they can't rise. So when you're rising, it's only so the background of the head rises or floats up towards ceiling, but the hips stay there. So the hips don't get to rise. So again, that will, of course, gently coax open the spine. So I'll take some concentration and coordination at first. As you rise, the hips are anchored, and only the crown, back crown, floats up. Hips do not, hips are, can even actually go in the opposite direction, but that might be more difficult. They're at the very least anchored so they don't go up. When you're sinking down, the crown, the head is bracketed. The head is held in a bracket, and only the hips are dropping. Only the hips are dropping. The crown, the head does not. Hips drop with gravity, but the head stays where it is. So when you rise, the hips are in a bracket, they can't go up, but the crown of that crown rises up. And then the head's in a bracket as you sink, and the hips fall away from the head. Rising up, the hips are anchored or held down as only the crown rises. And as you sink, The head is bracketed, held stable as only the hips drop. Release the abdomen. Another way of putting it, this may or may not be helpful, might be a simpler way to address it. The crown can only rise. It doesn't do any sinking. It only rises. The hips only sink. Hips can't come up, even if you wanted them to. Hips, tailbone, whole pelvic, girdle, it can only go down, it can't go up. So on the rising part, it's only the crown that can go up because the hips don't go up. On the sinking part, it's only the hips that go down because the hips can only go down. The crown cannot go down. And on the rising part, well, it's only the crown that can rise, the hips cannot rise. Release the abdomen. Okay, and gently come into a bit of a back stance, hold the ball, go into gentle parting horse's mane. But before you start, set all this up like we've been doing this. Not the very last thing we did necessarily, because that's a lot to think about. But tailbone, hips, little drop, and point the background of the head directly to the ceiling. Set that up before you start moving. And more actively, even drop the hips more. Before you start, actively press the hips, drop the hips to set you into motion. Release the abdomen. Before you go forward again, do an extra dropping, hanging of the hips to set you in motion. And the whole time, the background of the head is flush to the ceiling. Of course, that means your chin should feel like it's dropping down a tiny bit if it's the back crown that's flush. So feel maybe that helps open up your shoulder joints. Once you're able to relax into this to a certain degree, it starts to open up everything. It starts to have a cascading effect throughout the entire body. Maybe not at first, because the body's going to resist opening. But once your body gets soft and supple enough, this actually will have a cascading effect through the entire system, all the joints. One of the first next joints that you'll notice that can happen in is the shoulder joints. Let the hips fall away, let that lengthen and straighten the lower back, and point the back crown of the head directly flush to the ceiling. Everything in between, let that be empty and soft. Everything between the head and the hips, spine in the middle, let that be as empty and soft as you can allow it. Take that into some actual stepping. And notice what happens when you start moving more and you're stepping. Things contract, things compact, lower back compacts. Things happen, same sort of thing happens up here, upper back and neck. Notice those things happening, and then accentuate the fact that you're hanging those hips, a little bit of a free fall, slow motion, free fall. So notice when you lose it, use your intention, come back to that feeling. Notice when the abdomen is tightening up because of your concentration and also because the body is resisting that gentle pulling and opening. So consciously release the abdomen. Notice tensions creeping in. Notice what happens when you hold the ball. What goes against these directions? What pulls in? So maybe go slower as you go into stand and hold the ball, go slower so you can continue the same process. Allow it to happen. Down is primary, so let the hanging hips, the hips falling away, that's the main thing. And then you can maybe think of the crown or the rising. Now let's come and do a little bit of stationary cloud hands. So feet are about shoulder width apart, parallel, knees bent. Hands in position, and before you move, set up just like this is our standing. This is the same as our standing. We just happen to have the arms in a different position. But all those things that we were setting up before you start to move, and just like we had the hanging of the hips, lengthen the spine, driving the arms out for commencement, see if you can get cloud hands movement instigated by the dropping, hanging of the hips, lengthening of the spine. That's why the arms start into motion. That's why the body starts turning. That's the driver, that's the engine, that dropping, sinking, hanging, that's the engine to get everything moving. That's the gears that gets the body turning, the arms moving. It's purely that dropping, hanging of the hips. So make that a physical connection. And pointing the back crown of the head directly to the ceiling. The back crown of the head is parallel to the ceiling as the hips fall away. Hips are falling away, falling away. Of course, you may have noticed that puts more work in the legs. So we have to build up that leg strength to allow this process to continue even more and for a longer period of time. Releasing the abdomen. And then adding the stepping with the cloud hands. And that's a further opportunity to notice when